Restart Episode 9, the main event. The Orc commander stood at the forefront, towering, immovable, a figure shaped from brute authority. Behind him, a vast army lay concealed within the forest, hulking forms and dull steel swallowed by the shadows of the trees. Across the clearing stood 5 enemy chieftains, each emanating a distinct and dangerous presence. Closest to the center was a shrouded orc mage, its very existence pressing outward like a suffocating weight. Dark energies clung to it, and behind its silent form clustered the goblin mages, their obedience absolute beneath its dominion. To its side loomed a massive orc wielding twin cleavers. Broad-shouldered and thick with scars, he carried himself with the assurance of unquestioned command, the undisputed master of the orc warbands. A tan goblin with a missing left eye sat astride the largest hyena Sir Almond had ever seen. The beast's powerful jaws were stained dark with old blood, and its low growl rumbled like distant thunder beneath the goblin's sharp-toothed grin. Nearby stood a great bear, its scarred hide matted and torn. Deep claw marks raked across its belly, wounds not of weakness, but of survival, marking it as a creature that had endured battles few beasts ever walked away from. This powerful bear did not have a saddle on its shoulders. Last was a heavily armored goblin, fat and broad, its armor layered and reinforced far beyond common make. Steel plates overlapped like scales, and behind the helm's narrow slits, cold, calculating eyes watched everything. At a subtle gesture from the orc commander, the shrouded orc mage stepped forward. Its frame was wrapped in ragged hides and bone-hung charms that clattered softly as it moved. The hood cast its face in shadow, but scars cut deep through green flesh, streaked with dried blood and ritual ash. In its hands it carried an incongruous staff, a stolen dwarven artifact, unmistakable in its craft. Bands of stone and iron, etched with precise runes, were bound around living wood, now warped and scarred by crude handling. At the crown of the staff burned an animal-beast core of immense power, its glow pulsing like a malignant heart, distorting the air around it with barely contained force. The core was no mere focus. It was a compressed anima heart, the bound essence of a colossal apex beast harvested at the height of its strength. Amber and sickly yellow light churned within it like a living storm, pulsing in heavy, brutal beats. With every throb, phantom impressions of horns, claws, and fangs pressed against the surface, the spirit within raging against its prison. The dwarven runes meant to balance such power flickered violently, cracked and distorted by abuse. Around him, the goblin mages continued their assault. Fire and lightning tore through the sky, slamming into the wards in relentless waves, each impact hammering the defenses thinner, louder, angrier. The orc mage chief raised the staff, but only slightly upwards. His voice rolled across the battlefield in a deep, grinding incantation, each syllable dragged up from the earth itself. The ground beneath his feet blackened and split, roots withering as the beast core was torn open and bled for power it was never meant to surrender. The goblin mages fell silent all at once. Their chanting died in their throats as their eyes snapped to the chieftain, who finally raised the dwarven staff in full and leveled it toward Sir Almond and the gate beyond. Whether from fear or instinct, Almond began chanting a shield spell, threading it with his divine gift. Gold and crimson light bled together, forming a layered aura that shimmered with added protection. One of the scouts swallowed hard, voice tight as he leaned closer to the group. "Sir Almond, that thing won't break through us, will it?" The runes along the staff flared, sickly yellow, blinding, violent. Sir Almond didn't look away. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he finished the last syllable of the word. "Goblins are better at breaking wind," he said mildly, "than breaking through the golden conclave ranks." Everyone smiled at that comment. A quick laugh before a power unlike anything they had seen, yet came crashing at the gate. A column of yellow energy tore free with a thunderous roar. Not fire, not lightning, but pure kinetic dominance. The air screamed as it collapsed inward, compressing into a visible shockwave that flattened grass and cracked stone. The blast surged across the battlefield, widening as it traveled, before slamming into the protective wards with brutal force. For a single heartbeat, the wards held as raw power expanded over the shield. Wild energies flared and bucked against the shields, sigils blazing as they fought to redirect and disperse the impact. Currents of power raced across their surfaces in frantic spirals. Then something went terribly wrong. The yellow force did not disperse. It was caught, bent, and funneled. The ward screamed as its runes inverted, unraveling in sequence, and the vast majority of the blast was forced forward in a tightened, focused torrent, charging straight into the final shield outside the gate. The remaining barrier took the redirected impact all at once. Light detonated outward in blinding brilliance as the shield bowed violently inward, its surface warping like molten glass. The ground beneath the gate cracked wide, as stone exploding outward in a concussive wave. Sir Almond and the two scouts beside him had no time to brace. The redirected power hit like a charging god beast. The gate shield failed, not shattering, but dumping its stored force forward. The explosion followed, impacting with Sir Almond's divine shield with immense power. Almond reacted on instinct, forcing more power into his shield, trying to contain the impact. Instead, the surge destabilized it. The energy didn't vanish. It expanded outward, rebounding in every direction, ricocheting off the barrier in wild arcs, even as the core of the blast still struck them head-on. There was no time to adjust. Sir Almond was lifted from his feet, caught in the released energy and sent flying backward. The two scouts beside him were torn from the ground as well, their armor screaming under the strain as they were hurled away like straw dolls. All three slammed into the gate doors. Iron-banded wood buckled inward with a thunderous crash. Hinges screamed. Dust and splinters erupted in a choking cloud as bodies struck stone and timber with bone-jarring force. Sir Almond hit first, hard enough to crater the reinforced planks, the two knights crashing into the door beside him a heartbeat later. The gate shuddered, holding by sheer stubborn mass alone, as the echoes of impact rolled outward and finally died. The last of the yellow energy bled back into the stolen staff in a violent recoil. The beast core flared once more, overbright and furious, before dimming to a dangerous, pulsing glow, sated for the moment. The dwarven runes along the staff cracked further, shedding sparks of light and ash as the weapon struggled to contain what it had just unleashed. The battlefield fell into a stunned, ringing silence. Smoke drifted. Broken wards dissolved into embers. The gate stood with three armored figures slumped against it, the echo of the impact still shuddering through stone and steel. Behind the goblin lines, the orc lowered the staff slowly, the bound beast's fury still thrumming through the earth, as if waiting for the next command. The silence did not last. It broke beneath a single earth-shaking roar. The orc warlord, the largest of them all, stepped back into view, reclaiming the front of the line where he had stood before the goblin mages advanced. He towered over the battlefield, a mountain of scarred muscle and iron, his presence alone bending the lesser orcs to his will. In his hands he raised his bloody double-bladed scythe, the crescent edges blackened with old gore. He planted one massive foot forward and roared the command that inspired more fear than respect. "Attack, you grunts!" The army answered as one. Orcs surged past him in a roaring tide, flooding around the shrouded orc mage and the goblin casters, whose spells still crackled in the air. Formation collapsed into fury as warriors sprinted, shields raised, weapons screaming against armor. The ground trembled under the charge. Goblin riders burst from the flanks at full run, lean bodies hunched low as their mounts thundered forward. Enormous warbears crashed into motion at the center, hulking masses of muscle and fur with iron collars biting deep into their necks. Goblins clung to their backs and shoulders, shrieking as they jabbed spears and swung hooked blades, the bears' roars rolling like thunder. From above came a chorus of shrieks. Mutated goblin birds hurled themselves into the air and then forward, wings scarred and mismatched, talons flexing as riders leaned low against their necks. They dove and surged in ragged swarms, shadows tearing across the ground as they raced toward the gate. Behind them all came the bulk of the horde, goblins and orcs screaming, arrows loosed on the run, drums pounding somewhere in the mass, fast and savage. Dust boiled upward. Stone rattled. The sky filled with wings, firelight, and falling ash. Everything rushed toward the gate. Riders, beasts, and screaming infantry alike. While the warlord remained standing still, watching his army break into motion, his scythe lowering as the full weight of the assault crashed forward. The battle had begun. Captain Lynandra Stormheart's voice cut through the chaos as she gathered ranks, shoved stragglers into formation, and read the rhythm of the oncoming onslaught with a veteran's instinct. She did not look for spectacle, only pressure, timing, and where the line would bend first. Steel rang as shields locked, boots struck stone, and the defenders surged into position under her command. The Dawn Guard moved as one. Knight Almond was stirring, slowly regaining consciousness. With a shout, Sir Bruce vaulted over the edge, followed by more Imperial Knights. His sword remained drawn as he leapt down into the chaos outside the gate, one hand slapping against the wall to control his descent as he skidded the last stretch. He landed hard, rolled once, and came up on his feet in a single practiced motion. Without hesitation, he moved to support the wounded and help hold the line. He reached out, caught Sir Almond by the arm, and hauled him back to full stature. "Are you all right?" Bruce asked. "That was quite a powerful hit." Almond answered with a firm nod, coughing once as he brushed wood chips and dirt from his armor. That was rather unpleasant. "Good," Bruce said, a strong hint of concern threading through the word. "Your ability to absorb impacts and energy saves the day yet again." "It still hurt," Almond replied flatly. Bruce turned his head, gauging the distance between them and the goblins massing beyond the wreckage. The air still shimmered with residual power. Almond followed his gaze and added, voice tight but indignant, "This is definitely outrageous." Bruce glanced back at him. "To the point," he said. "The part where they threw a mega beast blast at your face, or the fact that you got knocked on your butt?" Almond didn't hesitate. "Both. Look, we don't have much time. I wanted to tell you before you decided to fly straight into the battle." Bruce paused, then added with a quick grin. It looked rather heroic, I might add. He briefly mimed the motion with his hands, soaring through the air and landing dramatically, before his expression hardened again. Pyraxis and Prince Ilarion have gone to speak with the Emperor, he said at last, the words coming out sharp, almost bitter. Concern, and then shock, flashed across Almond's face. His breath caught. We don't have our strongest defenders. This has become a matter of life and death, Bruce replied. He continued, lowering his voice as the memory returned. When we crushed the first goblin army, a mysterious elf appeared, tall, dressed entirely in black. It may have been Mary Bright, twisted into something darker. Bruce frowned. The entire Dawn Guard attacked him. He toyed with us before vanishing without a trace. It felt as though he was searching for the same strange power we've sensed in these outer lands. Bruce spoke again, shaping the air with his hands, dragon wings unfurling, then a sharp gesture skyward. The prince left with Pyraxis and the Archmage. They flew deep into the sky to seek counsel within the mirrors of Mercurius. Almond exhaled slowly, shaking his head. The weight of it settled in his chest. So we're down two of our strongest, he said, frustration tightening his voice, and I carelessly leapt straight into the battle. Bruce didn't miss a beat. Yup, so we're all on the same page now. He shrugged, a crooked grin flashing across his face. That was pretty heroically stupid. Almond stared at him for several seconds, surprise flickering at the bluntness of the remark. Then he shook his head faintly. That was Bruce, honest, unwavering when it mattered. The truth lingered. If the line had broken, if his charge had failed, others would have paid for it. Without another word, Almond patted Bruce's arm plates in thanks and turned away, moving toward the two scouts who had been hurled against the gates earlier. They were alive, breathing steadily, but still unconscious. The magic had spared them for now. Along the battlements, Sir Craig took his position, calm amid the storm. Two quivers rested at his back, each arrowhead fitted with goblin cores, specialized, volatile, and purpose-built for this war. His longbow was unlike any other, its reinforced grip ending in a short sword blade, granting him dominance at range and a lethal answer up close. He began to fire. Each arrow carried a different effect. Detonations flared, distortions rippled. Charging ranks below were torn apart as the projectiles struck, warped space, or erupted in controlled bursts of ruin. At another stretch of the wall, Sir Vinland aimed skyward. He fired relentlessly, arrows stitching through the air as he picked off the flying goblins one by one. Wings shredded. Bodies spiraled screaming into the mass below. The sky itself seemed to recoil as screeches echoed, and the aerial assault faltered under his steady aim. Sage frowned at the advancing tide. It's funny how every battle with goblins, they always send the weakest ones first. Vale responded instantly with an angry scoff. Because we waste our mana killing them first. He gestured sharply toward the mages gathered along the battlements. It's either melt them to ash or let them kill us to the last man with sheer numbers. Sage fell silent, watching as the goblins finally pressed within striking distance. Rows of golden conclave mages stood atop the wall, chanting in unison. Hands traced sigils in the air as power gathered, threads of magic weaving together into something vast and dangerous. Their voices rose, synchronized, resonant, perfectly controlled. The chant reached its peak, and then they released it, A massive wave of sunlight burst outward from the towers. Not light alone, but searing heat and crushing radiant force. It struck like a wall of judgment, rolling across the battlefield in a blinding arc. Green and tan flesh blistered and ignited on contact. Armor glowed red, then white, before warping and collapsing into itself. Weapons clattered uselessly to the ground as their wielders screamed, voices tearing apart beneath the roar of the spell. The radiance did not simply pass, it lingered. The ground itself burned, stone blackening, dirt vitrifying into glass beneath the unbearable heat. Enemies caught at the center were erased outright, reduced to drifting ash and drifting motes of light. Those at the edges staggered on fire, clutching at melting armor and scorched limbs before collapsing into smoking heaps. The battlefield became a rolling field of flame and brilliance, the air shimmering and howling as if reality itself recoiled. For a few precious seconds, the charge ceased to exist. Where once a writhing mass had surged forward, there was now only scorched earth, drifting smoke, and broad swaths of charred remains. Patches of ash and fire marked the path of the initial assault. Bodies fused into the ground or left twisting and groaning where the spell's edge had spared them just enough to suffer. Then the horns sounded again. Fresh enemy troops poured forward without hesitation, howling as they charged straight into the aftermath. They trampled over the fallen, crushing smoldering bodies beneath clawed feet, kicking aside the wounded who still burned and screamed in agony. Some slipped on melted ground or tangled remains, only to be shoved forward by the press behind them. The relentless tide surged onward, climbing over their own dead as if they were nothing more than rubble left behind by the light. The field had been purged, but the horde had not been broken. That moment was enough. Archers poured onto the walls, drawing and firing in practiced rhythm as the enemy reeled and reformed. Beyond the immediate assault, the battlefield widened in every direction. From watchtowers and battlements, it looked like a living tide. A sea of green bodies flooding around the outer walls, thousands upon thousands sprinting, howling, and leaping over rubble. They ran shoulder to shoulder, blades raised, shields clattering, their movement so dense it blurred into motion itself. Dust rose in choking clouds as their feet hammered the earth, the sound like surf crashing against stone. They surged forward together. At the front of the wave, goblins hurled themselves at the walls, only to be slammed back as the side wards flared to life. Brilliant arcs of force snapping and pulsing as bodies struck and were thrown aside. But the repulsion did not stop the flow. Those behind simply ran over the fallen, screaming and laughing as they pressed on. Around the entire city, the goblin tide wrapped the walls. Some hacked at the air where the wards shimmered. Others flung themselves forward repeatedly, testing for weakness, while still more sprinted past, circling, building speed and momentum. From above, it looked less like an army and more like a roaring current, endlessly moving, endlessly feeding itself. The defense did not break. It set itself like stone. Captain Stormheart's voice carried through the chaos of battle, sharp and absolute, and the battlefield obeyed. Imperial knights slid down from the walls in controlled streams, boots striking earth in perfect rhythm. Ropes lowered others to the ground in quick periods as golden shields with golden knights flooded into place, while archers threaded themselves forward through narrow gaps. The line expanded outward, shields locking edge to edge until more than 200 defenders stood packed together, a dense wall of iron, leather, and breathing bodies that stretched across the approach to the gate. Sir Cale Ironward took the center, planting his shield so firmly it bit into the ground, his longsword angled to catch and deflect rather than overextend. Sir Vale settled beside him, whisper blades glinting faintly, his stance loose and predatory, eyes already tracking where the line might be tested. Just behind them, Sir Sage rolled his shoulders and brought his twin short swords up as sunlight magic ignited along their runes, the glow bright yellow and warm, heat washing over the front rank like a blessing and a warning. Sir Bruce filled a gap on the left, armor dented, blade notched, jaw set with the quiet resolve of someone who had already survived worse. Further back high on the walls, Sir Craig and Sir Vinland ran to take their own places among the other archers, spacing measured by instinct and experience. Craig's longbow hummed as he drew, goblin core arrows selected and nocked with deliberate care, each one meant for a specific kind of death. Vinland's gaze lifted skyward, calm and precise, fingers already counting wind and distance as shapes began to move above the smoke. The volleys tore into the hyena riders sprinting along the perimeter. Arrows punched through snapping maws and armored torsos, dropping mounts mid-stride and hurling riders into the dirt. The charge collapsed into screams and tangled bodies as the second and third volleys followed, relentless and measured. Overhead, flying goblins shrieked as Vinland's arrows found wings and throats, sending them spiraling down into the chaos below. Craig's shots struck deeper into clustered ranks, some exploding on impact, others pinning multiple bodies together or ripping lanes through tightly packed mobs. The orc commander laughed in a deep, menacing voice. "Mages, hold your power back. I want to destroy them in one powerful blow. Rest up, 'cause I am going to get every ounce of power out of you." He motioned the pack of bears forward. "Do your worst," he spat. "Eat them up," he said, almost laughing. A deep, rolling thunder rose from beyond the smoke as war bears burst into view, massive frames armored in iron collars and scarred hide. Some goblins clung to their backs or were mounted on shoulders, shrieking as they lashed the beasts with barbed whips, driving them faster, harder, straight toward the gate. The earth shook with every stride, loose stones bouncing as the distance closed. Captain Stormheart's voice rose above the battlefield. "Archers, pivot. Take down those bears." Archers on the walls pivoted instantly, releasing volley after volley into the lines. Sir Craig pulled out a special arrow he was saving. It was made with an unstable or damaged goblin core. He lined up for the largest bear running in the front. As he went to release the arrow, he narrowly missed being hit by an orc arrow. His sudden movements caused him to release his shot prematurely. It whistled past his target and instead impacted with the random beast, the explosion of fire sending warbears flying in all directions, but the front was left unchallenged. More orc arrows rained down onto them, made from solid, thick, dark wood. He heard the unfortunate impacts into knights and archers. They screamed in pain, calling for healers, or fell dead to the ground. The Golden Conclave stood up and resumed their attack. Arrows hammered down in focused streams, burying themselves in thick muscle and armored skulls. One bear stumbled, bellowed, and collapsed, its immense weight crushing the goblins riding it in a spray of broken armor and blood. Another dropped moments later, then a third, each fall ending riders as surely as any blade. Vinland pulled 2 arrows and sent 2 bears falling to their knees. It caused a small gap as it greatly slowed the running pace. The charge thinned, but did not stop. 4 bears remained while the others turned away. The largest and oldest bear was leading the charge. towering a shoulder and head bigger than the other, with large marks on its chest, their chief bear. Wounded, frothing, and maddened by pain and whip cracks, the four thundered forward, goblins screaming triumph as the shield wall loomed closer. Shields braced, feet dug in, and breath caught across the line as the impact became inevitable. That was when Sir Almond moved forward, without fear. The shield wall momentarily parted, just enough to let him pass as he charged straight into the open ground. His golden staff came up in a defensive angle, runes along its length blazing brighter with every step. The bears hit him like a landslide. They impacted against him, pushing him with force backwards as they snarled. Red energy danced from the impact and spread like water drops in a calm, unmoving lake. Almond laughed as he redirected the crushing momentum into the runes themselves, as he moved his head to his right and left, avoiding angry chomps form drool-filled bear mouths. He let his energy out. Red power flooded outward, crimson and searing, released in a single controlled surge. The wave cut forward with surgical violence, slicing through fur, iron, and flesh alike. Bears and riders were severed cleanly, bodies falling in two separate pieces as the power dissipated into the air with a crack of displaced force. Almond stood straight again, watching more waves of bears coming forward. He began striking them down as they came at him. He struck right and left, killing bears and causing distractions. Behind Almond, the shield wall locked tighter. Archers were already drawing again, and Captain Stormheart watched the field with narrowed eyes. Waves of bears thundered into the open gaps, their roars shaking the air as they smashed unevenly into the shield wall with brutal force. Wood splintered. Golden alloy screamed. Entire sections of the line were driven backward, boots carving trenches into the dirt as soldiers fought to keep their footing. The ground quaked beneath each charge, the sheer mass of the beasts turning disciplined formation into a desperate test of endurance. Bears slammed into the shields again and again, their combined weight bowing the line inward as golden rims dug into dirt and boots slid backward. The wall groaned, on the verge of giving way. The pressure on the wall became unbearable, and Sir Sage did not wait for the line to break. Almost on cue, he turned to see Captain Stormheart, their eyes locked. She quickly nodded with her head for him to move forward, almost irritated. Again she motioned with her head for Sage to move forward. Sage saw the wall starting to give, and a quick plan formulated in an instant. He broke into a sprint, twin blades clenched tight, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "Kale! Alley-oop!" Sir Kale Ironwood answered without hesitation. He planted his feet, locked his shield, and braced just as Sage leapt. He landed squarely on the shield's reinforced center, and with a powerful heave, Kale surged upward and forward, using the shield like a living catapult. Sage was launched over the wall. He flew through smoke and chaos, cloak snapping behind him, and came down hard onto the headbear's back. Both blades drove straight down through fur and spine as the impact crushed the beast beneath him. Using the falling body as a springboard, Sage twisted and leapt again, boots kicking off blood-slick fur as another bear snapped at him mid-air. He landed face-to-face with it, steel flashing as he plunged one blade into its chest and raked the second across its throat. The beast staggered, then dropped. All around him, the bears roared and turned, their charge breaking as chaos erupted in their ranks. Another bear charged, jaws snapping as it reared to strike. Its massive paw swung toward him in a killing swipe. Sage held his ignited blades and braced for impact. White gold fire ran along their edges, the air warping with heat. Sage let the motion of the clawed attack do all the damage. Holding his blade firm, it cut clean through bone and sinew, severing the bear's arm completely. The limb spun away through the air, blood and scorched fur trailing behind it as it fell to the ground. The wounded bear roared and reared back, mouth wide in agony and rage. Sage lunged and drove one blade straight upward into the open jaws, the steel punching through palate and skull in a single brutal thrust. The heat cauterized as it cut, and the tip buried deep into the bear's brain. The roar died instantly, as the massive body collapsed forward, lifeless before it finished falling. All around him, the enemy charge faltered. Confusion rippled through the remaining bears as they turned toward him, their momentum shattered as Sage held his blades upward. That hesitation was all the archers needed. Arrows screamed in from the flanks and rear, golden-fletched shafts burying themselves deep into exposed sides and eyes. Bears wheeled around to attack, only to be cut down in mid-turn, their massive forms crashing into the dirt one by one. Behind them, the shield wall surged forward again, tighter and stronger than before. Sage stood amid fallen beasts, blades dripping and still glowing faintly as the fire within them dimmed. Heat rolled off him in visible waves, his chest heaving as he looked back toward the wall. Kyle met his gaze and gave a single, sharp nod. The wall held. Sir Almond drove forward into the chaos, his golden staff a blazing arc of motion as he struck left and right, each swing sending goblin warriors flying as though caught in the wake of a storm. Bones cracked, armor folded, and bodies cartwheeled through the air, colliding with others and vanishing beneath the churn of the battlefield. Striking a hyena with a mighty blow, its goblin rider fell at his feet while it went flying into an oncoming pack. The hyena bouncing off the ground and flew back upward, dismounting multiple riders off their beasts as it continued flying away from the powerful blow. Almond twisted and hit the goblin at his feet. It went directly into the mouth of one of the still charging beast, lodging directly in its throat. He pivoted sharply as a hyena lunged for his throat, jaws snapping inches from his face, and in one fluid motion he spun the staff through its body, impaling the beast cleanly through the chest. With a roar of effort, he lifted it high overhead, the rider shrieking and clawing for balance, and before the goblin could even raise its blade, Almond released a pulse of power. Red energy surged, the hyena and rider detonating in a violent burst that showered the ground in fragments of tissue, blood, and fire. The explosion washed the front line in heat and dust, and for a heartbeat he was blinded. He heard shouting, warnings as silhouettes emerged through the smoke. From that haze came the heavy, thunderous steps of orcs, larger and broader than the goblins, forcing their way forward with brutal intent. One of them broke through the chaos and swung a massive club, part of a tree torn free and crudely shaped, catching Sir Almond full across the face as he raised his staff in protection. The impact bounced partly off his staff, but still snapped his head to the side and sent him staggering, boots skidding across blood-slick earth. For a split second, disbelief crossed his features as red energy bled from the point of impact, crawling along his arm and pooling into his clenched fist. Then Almond stepped back in. He drove his fist forward in a single, devastating punch, red energy compressing and detonating on contact. The orc's head and chest exploded in a shockwave of force, the blast carrying red energy into the next orc behind it. The second creature's chest collapsed inward with a sickening crunch, armor folding like tin as it was hurled backward. The orc's eyes went wide in stunned disbelief just before it dropped its weapon and fell, lifeless, into the churn of bodies. Almond laughed, a sharp, feral sound torn from his throat as he turned to meet the next threat. The red glow surrounding him flared brighter, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Blood spilled from the newly formed gash. The blood ran down the side of his temple, down his left eye, and into his beard, hot and blinding. He felt the sting of it. Pride. A moment too slow. A moment too certain. He had allowed himself to be hurt. Snarling, Almond slammed his staff into the foot of an oncoming orc. It screamed in pain, and he struck it in the chest with such force that its chest caved in as it flew backwards into its own allies. He twisted again on his heel and drove his staff forward, impaling an onrushing orc through the chest. With a savage wrench, he tore it free and hurled the dying brute into another. They collided with bone-breaking force, crashing to the ground in a tangled heap of armor and limbs. Laughter boomed over the din of battle. A towering orc stepped forward, broader than the rest. Tusked grins split wide with cruel delight. It cracked its fists together as it advanced, eyes locked on the bloodied knight. "Puny human," it mocked. "What can you possibly do to hurt me? Stupid little man." Almond did not flinch. He stepped into the orc's reach and pressed the end of his staff lightly, almost gently, against its massive chest. Almond's expression was calm now, nearly amused. "Nay," said Almond with a playful tone. A torrent of crimson energy erupted from the staff, slamming into the orc with catastrophic force. The massive body was ripped off its feet and hurled backward, flying, spinning, unstoppable. It tore through the battlefield, smashing into ranks of orcs like a living missile. Bodies were crushed, bones shattered, armor folded inward as it plowed forward the ranks. The great orc finally struck the ground at the feet of the commander with a thunderous impact. Dust and debris billowed outward as the corpse skidded to a halt. Its neck snapped and limbs twisted at an impossible angles. The orc commander stared down at the body. It was not amused. Almond lowered his staff, the red glow dimming to a dangerous simmer as blood continued to drip down his face. The orcs hesitated, only for a heartbeat. Two charged him at once. The first came in low, hacking wildly. Almond stepped inside the swing and drove the butt of his staff through the orc's collarbone, crushing bone and dropping it instantly. Before the body hit the dirt, he pivoted and whipped the staff around in a brutal arc, caving in the second orc's skull. It collapsed without a sound. A sharp whistle sliced through the chaos. Almond looked up just in time to see Craig's arrow streak across the battlefield. The shaft struck an orc square in the head and did not stop. It split through skull and burst free, burying itself into a second orc behind it. Both fell where they stood, dead before their bodies finished falling. Almond barked a short laugh. He turned and raised his staff in a brief wave of thanks toward the distant archer. Movement flashed at the edge of his vision. Another orc lunged. Almond stepped forward and brought the staff down with devastating force. The impact snapped the orc's neck instantly. Its head whipped around so violently that its face froze, twisted backward, staring toward where the back of its skull should have been, before the body crumpled to the ground. The red glow around Almond surged once more as he straightened, staff humming in his grip. Blood, orcish and his own, spattered the earth around him. He did not slow. He did not hesitate. And the orcs nearest him began to fall back. Sir Craig stood atop the gate wall, high above the chaos, his boots planted against cold stone as the battle thundered below. From that elevated perch, He scanned the field with practiced calm, longbow resting easily in his hands. Each breath was measured, each movement deliberate. He helped where he could, quietly, efficiently, sending arrows downrange to end threats before they ever reached Almond or the crumbling line below. Orcs fell without fanfare. He was always struck by the contrast, the power and ferocity of Almond set against the man's absolute sincerity. Even now, amid blood and fire, that genuineness burned brighter than the red glow of magic around him. Craig's eyes tracked the battlefield in smooth, disciplined sweeps. Then he saw it. Almond unleashed another impossible strike, sending an orc the size of a small elephant hurtling backward through the ranks. The massive body became a battering ram, crushing and breaking enemies as it flew. Craig barked a deep laugh as the corpse finally slammed into the ground near the enemy leadership, dust and debris erupting outward. The laughter died in his throat, and he sent an arrow flying across the battlefield, ending 2 orcs who came too close to Almond. Finally, the orcs stopped moving forward. He looked back at the commander, expecting to see him upset, only to see a large, toothy smile. There, the orc commander and the towering orc mage stood together, confidence radiating from them as the mage raised the Draven staff and began channeling power. This was meant to be the end. A single, overwhelming blast, hurled into the defenders' camp to scour away the resistance in fire and ruin. The commander watched with grim certainty, already envisioning the Dawn Guard broken and burning. The fight concluded in one brutal stroke. A quick end. Final. Absolute. Craig saw all of it, and calmly rejected that future. He drew a slow breath and let the world narrow to angles and motion. The distance was extreme, far beyond what any ordinary human archer could reach with lethal force. Smoke drifted unevenly across the field, heat shimmered above scorched earth, and the wind twisted unpredictably as magic gathered near the mage. Craig compensated for all of it. He shifted his stance a fraction, adjusted the draw by instinct rather than thought, and aimed not at the orc mage, but at a patch of sky far above and behind it. His longbow bent under the strain, wood and sinew humming as if alive, as Valorian precision guided his hands. Release came not with force, but with certainty. The arrow climbed like a star flung skyward. At the apex of its arc, gravity and intent reclaimed it. The shaft descended with terrifying purpose, punching through layers of shroud, flesh, and armor, driven by the full authority of Craig's longbow. It did not stop at the chest. It drove all the way through, the impact slamming into the orc mage's heart with such force that the creature staggered violently, the dwarven staff falling uselessly from its grasp. The spell died unfinished, power collapsing inward as the mage fell backward, lifeless, into the dirt. Silence tore through the enemy line. Sir Vinland let out a mighty roaring laugh. He had seen the instant victory taken from the orc commander's hands, like a cool drink spilled on a hot summer's day. "Take that, you ugly mutt!" Sir Vinland screamed while laughing. The orc commander stared, stunned, as fear detonated among the goblins. Screams replaced chants, mages broke concentration, and warriors recoiled as panic spread like wildfire. That shot was never meant to exist by an ordinary human. Not at that range. Not through gathering magic. Not with such killing certainty. Yet Craig calmly lowered his longbow and reached for another arrow, unshaken. The fate the orcs had chosen, a swift, annihilating end for their enemies, had been torn from their grasp. This was not how the battle would end. Not against those guided by the might of Valoria. The mighty orc commander screamed in utter frustration, fists clenched, and it rang across the battlefield. Sir Sage and Sir Vale hurried forward, boots splashing through churned mud and broken ground, until they took position just behind Sir Almond's glowing silhouette. Sir Bruce followed a heartbeat later, armor clanking as he slid into place with the air of a man arriving late to a conversation he fully intended to improve. Together they surveyed the field ahead, where the enemy mass seemed to stretch without end. Vale spoke first, voice steady and unembellished. "This is at least an army of around 5,000 strong," he said, eyes moving from banner to banner, counting formations by instinct. "Goblins, orcs, and auxiliary beasts. If they surge all at once, they'll try to overwhelm us by sheer numbers." A low murmur rippled through the nearby fighters. Bruce adjusted his stance and looked skyward as a dark shape passed overhead. "That figure also excludes the goblin birds," he added calmly. "They typically dive without warning, seize someone while they're screaming, carry them very high into the air, and then drop them. No follow-up attack. Gravity handles the rest. Efficient from a logistical standpoint. It's pretty frightening and a horrible way to die." The bluntness landed harder than the threat itself. Before the silence could settle, Bruce leaned forward, squinting upward. "So," he said, rubbing his chin, "best advice is not to get picked up." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable, cutting through the roar of battle like a blade. Then laughter broke out, sharp, disbelieving, almost hysterical. 3 Imperial knights stood there laughing in the face of a sea of enemies, armor spattered, weapons drawn, as if they had just been told a particularly dry joke, rather than a catalogue of ways to die. The sound was brittle but genuine, the kind that burst free when fear had nowhere left to hide. Bruce blinked and looked between them, clearly confused. "I don't understand what part of that was funny," he said, glancing briefly toward the sky as if checking whether the birds had somehow improved the joke. "I just described people being dropped. That only made it worse." Vale shook his head, still smirking as he glanced sideways at Sage. "You realize that was meant to be reassuring." Sage met his gaze without a trace of irony. "I especially loved the monotone, 'It's pretty frightening,'" he replied evenly, as though reviewing a lecture rather than recounting airborne executions. The laughter ebbed, leaving behind a steadier calm. Breathing slowed, grips tightened with purpose instead of panic. Almond drew in a breath, crimson light coiling faintly around his gauntlet as he prepared to speak, no doubt to restore order or issue a command. "Friends," Almond called out, his voice carrying above the clash of steel and the roar of the enemy. "This fight is a ferocious one." The words were meant to steel them, yet as he spoke them, a colder truth formed behind his eyes. He had driven them hard, harder than he should have. Without Prince Ilarion at his side, without the steady counterweight the prince always provided, he felt the line stretched thin beneath his command. Not broken, not yet, but strained to its limits. No dragon to save the day. He pressed forward anyway, staff rising and falling, fire answering his will. Loyalty and fury carried him through each exchange, yet his gaze never stopped moving. What he saw set his jaw tight. The enemy was everywhere. Too many. Their ranks did not falter. They deepened, spreading wide as a tide drawing back before the killing wave. Goblins, orcs, and worse beyond them, an army gathering itself to strike with crushing force. "We are too few," he admitted silently, and they know it. Fear touched him then, not of dying, but of failing those who stood with him. He had led them here. He had asked them to follow. The thought burned hotter than any flame he commanded. Almond straightened, lifting his weapon high so they could see him through the smoke and blood. If this was to be a losing fight, then it would be met without hesitation. "Hold fast!" he shouted. "Stand with me!" Whatever the end, he knew this much with absolute certainty. He would not yield, not retreat, not falter. If the battlefield was to claim him, it would do so only after he had given everything he was, strength, fire, and life itself, to the stand. He held his golden staff upwards to the sky. The sunlight reflected off his staff, given the aura of power and light drowning out the darkness. The enemy began its charge toward them. Almond lifted his head as the shadow spread across the battlefield, vast and unmistakable. For an instant, his breath caught. A dragon, his mind insisted, hope flaring hotter than the Valorian fire coiled in his veins. Pyraxis returned at last, wings blazing against the sky, the prince standing on his golden back, descending to shatter the siege and rewrite fate. Around him, the clash of steel began to falter, as others felt it too. That sudden wrongness in the air that promised salvation or annihilation. The battle slowed, then stopped. Orcs lowered their jagged weapons. Goblins froze mid-howl. Humans, braced for death, lifted their eyes as one. From the clouds fell streaming lights, blazing red blurs that screamed through the sky like falling stars, dragged sideways by unseen hands. They struck the enemy lines and exploded on impact, not with flame alone, but with crushing force, hurling bodies and earth skyward in violent blooms of smoke and shattered ground. Entire formations vanished beneath those impacts, as if the land itself had turned against them. "Those are dwarven air missiles," said Almond in a state of utter confusion. A deep mechanical hum rolled over the field, drowning out cries and commands alike. The shadow sharpened, resolving into iron and runes as a colossal dwarven airship tore free of the clouds. Its armored hull gleamed dully through the smoke, plates interlocked with brutal elegance, glowing sigils etched along its flanks. More red streaks launched from its underside, arcing downward before slamming into orc and goblin ranks with devastating precision, each impact ripping holes through the enemy mass and sending debris high into the air. Then the airship unleashed something heavier. From each of its four corners, massive shapes detached and plummeted toward the ground. Each form was compacted tight, limbs folded, plates locked, so that what struck the battlefield looked like nothing more than enormous stones hurled from the sky. They hit in perfect unison. The earth gave way. 4 titanic impacts slammed into the field, punching craters so deep the ground folded inward around them. Dirt, shattered rock, and pulverized bone blasted outward in wide rings. The shockwaves knocked warriors flat and rattled armor, while a wall of dust rolled up and swallowed everything beyond a few steps. For a heartbeat, there was only drifting earth and ringing silence. Then shapes moved at the crater edges. Orcs ran forward, shouting through the haze, weapons raised. They clustered at the lips of the pits, peering down into the churning dust, trying to see what had fallen. Something inside the crater shifted. Stone cracked. Metal screamed. What had looked like a single mass twisted apart as plates rotated and joints unfolded. A towering shape forced itself upward, shedding dirt and rock as it rose. Deep red light flared through the dust, eyes igniting like embers beneath ash. "You don't belong here," a grinding voice echoed from the crater. An orc barely had time to turn. The fist burst from the crater like a siege hammer. Steel met flesh with a wet, cracking detonation. The golem's knuckles drove straight through the orc's torso, collapsing ribs and pulping organs in an instant. Blood sprayed outward in a hot fan as the upper half of the body was torn free and hurled away, spinning through the dust, trailing red before vanishing from sight. What remained, legs, hips, and boots, stood frozen for a heartbeat, upright and empty, before tipping over and collapsing into the dirt. The orcs nearest the crater recoiled in horror. Shouts died in throats. Weapons sagged. Several stumbled backward, eyes locked on the crater as something vast shifted inside it. The golem rose. Plates unfolded. Dirt and stones slid from its shoulders as it hauled itself upright, red eyes burning through the dust. Before the orcs could scatter, the golem reached out and seized one by the head. Its metal fingers closed, crushing helm and skull together. Bone split with a sharp report. Blood and fragments poured down the golem's wrist as it pulled, tearing the body apart at the spine. It did not discard the pieces. With a single motion, it hurled the upper half like a club. The body struck a smaller orc and drove him straight into the ground, burying him nearly a foot deep with a dull, meaty thud. The golem followed with the lower half, flinging it just as hard. It slammed into another goblin-sized fighter, snapping him backward and smashing him face first into the soil, blood and teeth bursting out across the dirt. The golem hauled itself free, towering and angular, rune-bound steel streaked with soil. A red steel helm crowned its head, and thick red banded steel wrapped its wrists. Its eyes burned deep crimson as it scanned the field. The remaining orcs screamed now. Some turned to run. Others froze, staring up at the towering shape climbing fully from the crater, its red eyes fixed on them as blood dripped from its steel fingers. "You are in the way," the golem said, its voice grinding and merciless as it stepped forward. Another orc rushed it from the side, trying to bury a knife into its side. The golem stepped forward and brought its foot down. The ground cracked as the weight crushed the orc flat beneath it, armor collapsing into the dirt as the golem moved on without slowing. The orc laid in a pool of its own gore. Around the crimson-marked golem, the other craters erupted in motion as living mass tore free of the earth. Stonehide flexed, shoulders rolled, and massive chests drew breath as the golems rose with snarls and low laughter, shaking dirt from their backs. One seized a goblin by the ankle and swung it once before punting it shrieking across the battlefield. "Durinrak," he called, grinning through blood and dust. "We're down! All of us! Perimeter's coming together!" The red-helmed golem turned, red eyes alive and predatory, as he scanned the sky where the distant silhouette of the airship cut through smoke and cloud. "Good," he rumbled. "He hasn't descended yet." "Balinor, Gorund, Ruikak," Durinrak barked, crushing an orc underfoot just to feel it break. "Clear the widest road you can. Thoriniel drops straight through the middle when he comes. I want nothing left standing to slow him." The named golems answered with hard nods and savage smiles, then surged outward. An orc barreled in, screaming, "Bring it down!" and drove his cleaver toward Durinrak's knee. Durinrak stepped inside the swing, caught the orc by the throat, and slammed him face first into the ground. The cleaver skidded away. Durinrak twisted once and released. The orc did not rise. To the left, a wild bear thundered forward, goblin rider howling and jabbing with a spear. "Break the stone beasts!" the goblin shrieked. Balinor met the charge head-on. He took the spear through the shoulder without slowing, seized the bear by the skull, and wrenched sideways. The beast collapsed in a heap. The goblin tried to scramble free, but Balinor crushed him under one heavy step and tore the spear loose, snapping it in half before throwing the broken haft aside. Goblins swarmed Goran's legs, hacking and shouting, "Cut them down! Cut them down!" Goran growled and dropped to one knee, sweeping his arm low. 3 goblins went down under the blow. A 4th leapt for his face, dagger raised. Goran caught it mid-air, closed his fist, and flung the limp body back into the press. "Too light," he muttered, rising again. Another orc charged Ruikak with a warhammer, roaring defiance as he swung. Ruikak blocked with his forearm, stone ringing under the impact, then drove his other fist straight through the orc's chest and shoved him clear. Ruikak did not watch the body fall. He was already turning as more enemies rushed in. "Hold the line!" an orc captain shouted. "Don't let them through!" Durinrak answered by grabbing the captain's banner pole and yanking him forward into a crushing headbutt. The banner fell. So did the captain. Bears, orcs, goblins, everything that came at them was met, stopped, and put down. The golems advanced step by step, killing with hands, weight, and momentum, voices rumbling as they fought. "Clear it!" Durinrak shouted. They did. "We are stronger than fear!" The crimson-helmed golem roared as he pushed forward, voice rolling across the field. An orc rushed him head-on, armor clattering, and Durinrak split him open with a single tearing motion before casting the body aside. The sound of his shout carried, and the line ahead of them wavered. An orc lunged at Durinrak, bellowing as he swung a jagged blade for the golem's head. Durinrak stepped inside the strike and caught him by the chest, fingers locking into armor and flesh alike. With a single motion, he hauled the orc off his feet and pulled him close until their faces were nearly touching. The orc froze. Up close, the red glow in Durinrak's eyes reflected in the orc's own, wide and suddenly clear. The blade slipped from numb fingers. I am sorry?" the orc said, the words small and confused, as if he were not certain who he was apologizing to. Durinrak held him there for a heartbeat longer, listening to the fear unravel. No, wait, please," he babbled, voice cracking into panicked noise, head shaking as if denial alone might save him. Then he turned and threw. The orc vanished from the battlefield in a screaming arc, the sound tearing loose and trailing after him as he flew far beyond the clash of steel and stone, past smoke and shouting, until even the scream thinned and was gone. To Durinrak's right, Balinor took the charge of a bear with a goblin rider clinging to its shoulder. The beast thundered forward, saliva flying, while the goblin shrieked and stabbed downward, the blade screeching uselessly against stone. Balinor snarled and seized the bear by the shoulders. With a violent wrench, he twisted. The bear came apart with a wet, tearing sound. Spine snapped, flesh ripped. Blood and steaming viscera burst outward, splashing across the ground as the two halves fell away in opposite directions. Balinor let the ruined halves of the bear drop from his hands. They hit the field with a heavy, wet thud. The goblin was flung free, tumbling through the gore, landing hard and scrambling to its feet, still screaming. Balinor brought his foot down once. The goblin vanished beneath it, flattened into the mud with a dull, final crunch. Gorand was laughing as goblins swarmed him, hacking at his legs and shrieking curses. One climbed his back, stabbing wildly, the blade chipping stone. Gorand reached over his shoulder, closed his hand around the goblin's head, and tore it free. He hurled it into the mass ahead. The body struck with bone-breaking force. Goblins went down in a spray of blood and shattered limbs, skulls cracking on impact. Several collapsed instantly, eyes bursting, mouths vomiting blood, as Goran drove forward through them. "You lot picked the wrong ground," he rumbled. Ruikak fought quietly, efficiently. An orc with a spear charged him, roaring, "Bring it down!" Ruikak caught the spear shaft mid-thrust and stepped in. His fist collided with the weapon, shattering the spearhead into splinters of metal and wood. The same blow continued forward. The orc ceased to exist as a solid thing. The impact reduced him to a cloud of green mist and fragments. Armor shards, bone, and meat spraying outward before falling uselessly to the ground. Ruikak did not slow. Durinrak lifted his head, eyes narrowing toward the distance. "Their commander," Goran said, pointing with a blood-slicked hand, amusement creeping into his voice as his chin lifted toward the towering figure rallying the orcs. All four golems turned their attention at once. The commander noticed. Fear flickered across his face, twisted immediately into rage as he roared and raised his weapon. "Still standing," Balinor growled, wiping gore from his forearms. "Not for long," Ruikak finished, something cold and eager sparking behind his eyes. They began to throw. An orc charged, screaming defiance, and Ruikak seized him by the armor and hurled him in a high, brutal arc toward the commander. Goran followed, grabbing two goblins at once and launching them after the first, bodies colliding mid-air. Balinor added a rider torn from a fallen bear, flinging it with enough force to snap its neck before it even flew. The commander spun his double-bladed scythe, roaring as the first body reached him. He cleaved it in half mid-air, blood fanning out in a wide spray that rained down over him. He cut another apart, steel flashing, chunks of meat and armor tumbling to the ground. The third hit him full in the chest. The commander staggered back, coughing as his feet dug furrows into the mud. More came. Faster. Heavier. Durinrak hurled an orc like a living battering ram. Goran sent another spinning end over end, the body twisting unnaturally as it flew. They struck between swings, hammering into the commander's arms and torso. One impact drove him to a knee, the ground cracking beneath his weight. Another body slammed into the commander's chest and carried him backward, driving the breath from his lungs as he fell flat onto his back. For an instant, he lay there stunned, half buried beneath broken bodies and churned earth, his scythe sinking uselessly into the muck beside him. Fear flickered in his eyes. Not the quick panic of a cornered soldier, but something deeper, recognition. This was not a battle turning poorly. This was a slaughter unfolding beyond control. The ground trembled with each advancing step of the golems, and the sky itself seemed to recoil from what was happening below. The fear curdled. Rage burned it away, hot and violent, twisting his features as he clawed his way upright, blood and mud streaking his armor. "Shield!" he roared. "Mages, now!" Lightning erupted. A crackling barrier snapped into place just as the next wave struck. Goblins, orcs, beasts, anything hurled forward, hit the shield and detonated. Bodies burst apart on contact. Flesh atomized in blinding flashes. Bones shattered and spun away as white shrapnel, armor plates folded and tore free. Blood vaporized into red mist that billowed outward before raining back down in hot, stinking sheets. Limbs struck the ground in wet slaps. Skulls cracked mid-air and scattered fragments across the mud. Thunder boomed with every impact, The air burned with ozone, scorched meat, and ash. The commander stood behind the barrier, chest heaving, eyes wide and unblinking, as chunks of his own troops splattered across the shield and fell smoking at his feet. The golems did not slow. "Barriers up," one said, rolling his shoulders, stone grinding as he cracked his neck. "Doesn't matter," another replied. "We're not done clearing." They continued forward. The golems did not charge. They did not hurry. They advanced with the steady inevitability of a collapsing mountain, stomping down enemies beneath their feet, or hooking them with a casual kick and launching them into their own ranks like thrown stones. An orc tried to flee. Durinrak stepped down on him without looking. The body collapsed into the mud with a meaty pop, armor buckling as the torso flattened and blood fanned outward in a dark ring. Balinor caught a goblin mid-scream and booted it sideways. The kick shattered ribs and sent the body cartwheeling through the air, slamming into a knot of troops. Bones cracked on impact. 3 went down, tangled together in blood and broken limbs, screaming until another footfall ended it. Gorund laughed as he grabbed a charging beast by the horn, spun once, and released. The creature plowed through a line of orcs like a boulder through brush, leaving crushed bodies and ruptured armor in its wake. Those not killed outright crawled, dragging useless legs, choking on blood and mud. Ruikak treated it like a game. He timed his steps, nudging enemies into one another with short, brutal kicks, sending goblins flying just far enough to crash into advancing troops. Each collision burst bodies apart, skulls caving, necks snapping, organs bursting free under the force. He adjusted his angle, expression unreadable, as if correcting poor form. They moved through the chaos with ease, fielding the battlefield like children at play. Enemies struck the shield ahead of them and detonated in flashes of gore and lightning. Those behind were crushed, scattered, or flung screaming into the killing wall. There was no safe distance, no angle of approach that did not end in obliteration. The commander watched it all from behind the barrier, eyes wide, jaw clenched so tight it trembled. Rage burned there still, but beneath it was something else now. Helplessness. The realization that he was no longer commanding a battle. He was watching his army be erased. The golems marched on, laughing and roaring as they carved deeper, red eyes lifting toward the sky, step by unstoppable step, opening a living corridor of death. Durinrak finally raised his gauntleted fist high and snapped his arm upward. A red flare screamed into the sky, burning bright as it arced above the battlefield. Moments later, the airship slowed and settled into a steady hover above the carnage, its vast shadow sliding across broken bodies and churned earth. Thick ropes dropped from its underside, swaying once before snapping taut as figures began to descend. 5 armored dwarves slid down in disciplined waves, boots slamming into the ground with bone-cracking force. Axes came around the instant they landed, lethal arcs flashing through the smoke. Blades bit deep, shearing through armor and flesh alike. Enemies rushed them and died just as quickly, split, crushed, or hurled aside in bloody ruin. Among them descended a single figure without heavy armor, an older dwarf with long white hair and a broad white beard streaked with soot. His eyes burned with fierce intelligence, sharp and calculating even as chaos boiled around him. A battle-worn axe rested across his back, its edge nicked and darkened by old wars. "Hello, Thoriniel," Durinrak said, as he landed with a heavy thud. Thoriniel slid down the rope one-handed, the other gripping the strange, humming power gun. He released the rope, dropped the final distance, and landed in a crouch. The ground cracked beneath his boots. He straightened, took in the battlefield in a single glance, then turned to Durinrak. "Fine day to kill orcs, goblins, and anything else foolish enough to call itself evil," Thoriniel said dryly. Durinrak's stone face split as the golem let out a deep, grinding laugh, like boulders rolling together. "Indeed," he rumbled. Things were starting to get far too boring. Thoriniel raised the weapon and fired in short, controlled bursts as he advanced, each thunderous shot ripping into the enemy with chaotic force. Armor twisted like soft tin, bodies were flung aside, and the air itself warped and shimmered where the energy passed, scorched and screaming. He hit the ground, running. As if this were an everyday excursion, Thoriniel bent smoothly, slid his axe free from his back, and drove it straight into the face of an oncoming hyena beast. The blade split bone and skull, the impact snapping the creature's neck as blood sprayed across the mud. He tore the axe free and laughed, a deep, delighted sound, already advancing. He fired once more. An orc exploded sideways in a spray of flesh and shattered armor, then cleaved with the axe, the motions seamless and practiced. Shot, strike, step. Invention and tradition moved together in his hands, as though they had never known separation. Around him, the armored dwarves formed a brutal wedge. Axes rose and fell in heavy arcs, severing limbs, crushing spines, and reducing charging bodies to broken heaps. Enemies that slipped past were dragged down, pinned, and finished with short, merciless blows. Above them, the airship's final answer spoke. Mounted weapons at the bow and stern roared, spitting streams of solid metal into the goblin lines from both directions. These were not arrows and not flame, relentless projectiles that punched through shields, tore through bodies, and kept going. Lines collapsed as torsos ruptured and limbs vanished, the ground erupting in fountains of blood and debris. From sky and ground alike, the enemy was caught in an iron storm. Those who ran were cut apart from above. Those who charged were butchered below. Dwarven craft and brutality worked in perfect harmony, turning the battlefield into a grinding machine of death. Sir Almond lowered his gaze back to the field, awe hardening into resolve. What were dwarves and airships doing this far into Valorian lands? This was no dragon, no reborn legend. This was genius given steel and wings. As the golems crushed forward and red streaks continued to fall from the sky, the tide of battle did more than turn. The enemy's promised victory shattered. An old rhyme surfaced in Almond's mind, one his father used to murmur while correcting a child's clumsy footwork with a wooden blade. 2 buckets of gold may buy a moment's gleam, but a genius dwarven friend foils fate's cruel scheme. Kurt finally understood exactly what it meant.